Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China, and new cases have been confirmed around the world.
So you don't want to frighten the American public.
France and South Korea have also got evacuation plans.
But you need to prepare for and assume
strongly warning Americans to avoid all non-essential travel to China.
That this is going to be a real serious problem.
France, Australia, Canada, the US, Singapore, Cambodia, Vietnam, the list goes on.
Health officials are investigating more than 100 possible cases in the US.
Germany, a man has contracted the virus.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
Japan, where a bus driver contracted the virus.
Coronavirus has killed more than 100 people there and infected more than 4,500.
We have to prepare for the worst, always, because if you don't and the worst happens.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Live from Fort Defiance on Capitol Hill, the United States of the Federal Reserve. It is Wednesday, the 15th of April, the year of our Lord 2020. The entire War Room posse's here. Jack Maxey, Jason Miller, Raheem Kassam, Stephen K. Bannon, live on the John Fredericks Radio Network on americasvoice.news, the streaming service for the Trump Revolution. And remember, they cover the press conferences wall to wall on Dish 219, on Newsmax TV, now in 70 million homes. Also, FM 99.1, 103.9 in Chicago, in the Chicago suburbs. Nexus.org, IRRS, throughout the world, 250 million English-speaking people we reach between Latin America, Africa, Russia, India, all of it. In the Middle East, Israel. Love to get your comments every night. We read them all night long, all the thousands that come through. Also, later in the day, in Mandarin, subtitled on G News in GTV. I want to thank all of our distribution partners, and we're ubiquitous, correct, Raheem, on every platform out there on podcast?
Omnipotent across all the platforms. Pandemic.warroom.org is where you can find out more about where you can download. It really helps us, by the way, when you subscribe and you encourage others to subscribe. It pushes us up the rankings. It's not just downloads that these podcast guys count. It's subscribers, and it's free. So find out where you can subscribe, download, and it helps us get into more phones.
And even if you're someone who listens every day live, please go on, subscribe, leave a review. Helps it bump it up, gets the search terms higher. All very helpful.
It's all free. Hashtag War on Pandemic. We want to hear your voice. Great comments, observations, and news items questions we ought to be asking, fact-checking. Yes, sir.
And tweet at us once you've done it, and you'll get a retweet from Jason Miller and Raheem Kassam.
And two rock stars in the world of Twitter. Now that Jack Dorsey, the hashtag Jack Dorsey, CCP running dog. Okay, but we want to thank Jack Dorsey for helping us. Okay, it's so much to get through, and we want to thank the president for finally pulling the cash out of the World Health Organization. Something that if you listen to the War Pandemic, I think it was a week ago, 10 days ago, we started. And of course, on Saturday to start the 2-hour special, Descent into Hell, the life of the Chinese people under the Chinese Communist Party, we started with part 2 of our World Health Organization beatdown. We recommend to the president that Dr. Ben Carson, if the United States puts another penny into this debacle, it should come attached to Dr. Ben Carson. Ben Carson should be the new head of the World Health Organization. He's a brilliant surgeon, a great man, beloved by everybody, and has a spirit that we think the World Health Organization needs. So Dr. Ben Carson. We're now going to we want to start with a bang. And there was a story in Forbes last night that we want to make sure everybody reads. Because if you think it's as bad as the president's walking through, you ain't seen nothing yet, because it's so much worse. And I know the president, everybody's going to start getting the information today from the guys that Open the Books, which is one of the best not-for-profits out there. These folks are in government records nonstop to find out where all the waste, fraud, and abuse is. And if you don't think there's waste, fraud, and abuse, you would be mistaken. Adam Andrzejewski.
Come on.
Adam. God, I've known him forever. Adam, thank you for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be on the program. I join you from Illinois, which, as you know, Steve, is the Super Bowl of corruption.
Not downstate, just the upstate guys. Listen, walk us through quickly, Open the Books, and then hit us with the broadside about this $3.5 billion that we've poured into this mess over the last 10 years.
So at openthebooks.com, our mission is to capture every dime and post it online. So every dime that government spends, last year, Steve, we filed 41,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. We captured data and then we audited it. Specific to the World Health Organization, over the course of the last 24, 36 hours, we dove into the line-by-line transactions coming from U.S. federal agencies to the World Health Organization since 2010. And here's what we found. $3.5 billion flowed from United States taxpayers to the World Health Organization.
Here's the thing. How come they don't make it? By the way, at 41,000, you're making Tom Fitton over Judicial Watch look like a piker, right? I mean, you guys are on it. Talk to us. Why is this not all in one area that people can just click a button and they don't have to go to your organization? Why does the government make it so difficult to find out how much money's been put out?
So think about this. At the local, state, and federal levels, all government spending is siloed up. What we do is we unsilo it. So for the first time in our nation's history, everybody watching the program today, you can come to openthebooks.com and you can look up 23 million public employees' salary and pension records. We have virtually every single public employee, their salary and their pension record at every level of government across the whole country. That was never done before. Specific to for instance, like the CDC, we gave oversight to the CDC payroll under the Trump administration versus the Obama administration at the start of this healthcare crisis. And Steve, what the Trump administration doesn't get credit for is that the payroll number was at an all-time high. So Trump didn't cut money from the Centers for Disease Control in this country. They were well prepared to be able to deal with this pandemic ahead of time. The payroll was at an all-time high.
Walk us through, how did we get to $3.5 billion? Correct me if I'm wrong. In your article, I think our dues are 5x what China is, but our quote-unquote dues or assessments, I guess they call it, was $611 million over this time. How do you get from $611 million, which many in the audience will say, why are we paying that, to the $3.5 billion? What is that delta?
So the difference is $2.9 billion in voluntary contributions. It basically comes from three agencies. It comes from the Agency for International Development, about $1.5 billion of that. It comes from the Department of State at about $820 million. And it comes from our own Centers for Disease Control, about $1 billion.
And so what specifically are we doing? Look, the people aren't arguing right now whether you need a World Health Organization. Clearly, you need somebody that can coordinate with these other countries. We want to make sure this thing doesn't spread. The question is, what's the supervision? What's actually getting done? And whose money's paying for it? Walk us through what's the details in back of this $2.9 billion gap? What is actually being spent for?
So about $1 billion went to eradicate polio, a noble cause. Then there was money that went to about $300 million went to eradicate tuberculosis. Then you have about $150 million that went to the fight on global AIDS. You have about a little less than $40 million that was spent on biomedical research. Most of that money came out of Ben Carr's, over at Health and Human Services and the Centers for Disease Control since 2010. So that's kind of a breakdown. But during the Trump administration, we compared his first 3 years on funding the World Healthcare Organization to the first 3 years of Obama's second term. And here's what we found. We found $1.4 million adjusted for inflation. $1.4 billion in the Trump administration flowed to the World Health Organization versus only $1.1 million in the Obama administration. $1 billion flowed to the World Health Organization. The Trump administration is very generous.
Yeah, it's been more generous. Okay, well, they've always had management issues there. What's your assessment for the American people of how this thing, how are their hard-earned tax dollars managed by the World Health Organization?
So an Inspector General report in 2018 on our contributions through the Agency for International Development to the World Health Organization, they said basically in a nutshell, it's a free-for-all. They suspended $250 million worth of our grants into the World Healthcare Organization and other international healthcare organizations. They disbarred 50 agencies, entities, and key people that were in charge of the execution of our taxpayer funds. Look, it's really bad, Steve, when the Associated Press does a report on the World Health Organization and finds that they spend more money on travel, $200 million a year on travel, and that exceeds the amount of money they spend fighting key infectious diseases like Ebola and tuberculosis and polio.
So the president's, they're starting an investigation, right, inquiry. Are you guys going to participate in that? Have you reached out to the IG and to the other people that are going to do this investigation to give them your knowledge and your insights?
Well, as a senior policy contributor at Forbes, I had to reach out to the White House and request comment. And they were very good about it. We got an on-the-record comment. We got their fact sheet. And when our article published with the oversight, we did send that to the White House. So they are very aware of our oversight research here.
Not asking you to speculate, but it's supposed to be a 90-day investigation. What do you think? What right now, as you sit here and you know this as well as anybody, what do you think the outcome of this is going to be?
So I think most of it happens over the last 60 days. There's two outcomes right here. One is the president can go to Congress and try to rescind the money to the World Health Organization. We both know how that would turn out. Congress has shown no capacity to deal with waste, fraud, corruption, and abuse. So here's the gainful path for the White House. When Congress is out of session, they can repurpose the money. They have to notify Congress of what they're going to do, but they have broad executive control to repurpose funds that Congress has already spent, and they would repurpose those funds, we believe, away from the World Health Organization.
What do you think of our recommendation? We recommend it. We've been on this beating these guys down because of their performance, not the financials, but their performance over the last couple of weeks, and called for the president to basically suspend all money. But then on Saturday, we recommended that Dr. Ben Carson step in. If American money is going to go into this, Dr. Ben Carson ought to head that up. What do you think, Adam?
So over at HHS, Health and Human Services, which Carson heads up, through the Centers of Disease Control, they already put $1 billion into the World Health Organization over the course of the last 10 years. So Carson would be a perfect person with intimate knowledge of how this thing's funded and how it works already. Here's the second thing. Look, the president has
hold it. HHS puts $1 billion, but Dr. Carson right now is over at HUD. It's Azar is at Health and Human Services. So
okay.
do you think his ability as a surgeon, what he knew at Johns Hopkins, and being a cabinet member and understanding what HHS does, do you think he'd be a logical choice to go?
Sure, absolutely. I think he's given good leadership and has been. He knows how to execute the policies of the administration. Here's the president.
Go ahead.
Has a compelling argument against the WHO. He says that they've deceived and they delayed the worldwide response by coddling China. So think about this. The WHO didn't even declare this as a pandemic until March 11th. Look, my children's school was canceled by March 11th. The WHO, they criticized the president on January 28th, on January 31st, when the president closed travel, put the travel restrictions on with China, and they delayed from January 2nd till January 28th that there was human-to-human transmission of the virus in China. So those 3 points are huge. The WHO has failed on those 3 points, and that's on the record.
Adam, we got about 30 seconds. Your group's amazing. How do people get access to you? What's your Twitter handle, and how do people get access to all these records that you guys have in your files?
Well, our Twitter handle is @open_the_books. You can also find us on Facebook. Our website is just simply openthebooks.com, and that's where you can search all this government data that we've captured.
Adam, fantastic. The article's in Forbes. We got a link to the site. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Steve.
Okay, #War Room Pandemic. We want to hear all your comments. I mean, that's pretty shocking. When people thought it was bad enough with the $611 million and their horrific performance of not being China-centric, being running dogs for the Chinese Communist Party. We'll get into all that next when we return on War Room Pandemic. We're going to talk about the Chinese Communist Party and the World Health Organization next. We'll return in just a second.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Welcome back to the War Room. I just had these breaking news from the guys on Open the Books. This whole debacle with the World Health Organization is much deeper than people think, right? And people say, oh, well, $3 billion, just a rounding error. Hey, this is taxpayers' money, and it's going to support the Chinese Communist Party. Now, what we can't lose track of is that the World Health Organization is a sideshow from who's really responsible, and that is the Chinese Communist Party. Clearly, we got to clean up the mess there. And we think it's not just a 90-day investigation holding back money. I love Adam's recommendation. Wait till they're out of session and just use your executive powers. That would be a Trump move. But also, it's got to be new management. Tedros has to go. He's lied to people's faces about this. 95% of this could have all been avoided if this had been dealt with in the third and fourth week of December. All the deaths in Wuhan, the deaths in Hubei, all the economic destruction, that people are home. Observations, comments about the Open the Books and World Health and what the President did yesterday.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is explosive, and we have the clip teed up of the President talking about this when he actually did it here.
Today, I'm instructing my administration to halt funding of the World Health Organization while a review is conducted to assess the World Health Organization's role in severely mismanaging and covering up the spread of the coronavirus. Everybody knows what's going on there. American taxpayers provide between $400 million and $500 million per year to the WHO. In contrast, China contributes roughly $40 million a year, and even less. As the organization's leading sponsor, the United States has a duty to insist on full accountability. One of the most dangerous and costly decisions from the WHO was its disastrous decision to oppose travel restrictions from China and other nations. They were very much opposed to what we did. Fortunately, I was not convinced and suspended travel from China.
And let's not forget, of course, on January 14th, the WHO tweeted out, preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan, China.
Now, this is the 14th when the Chinese delegation is still at the White House. The East Wing signing ceremony is the next day on the 15th. But even more, as damning as that is, Jack, correct me if I'm wrong, on the 12th, they actually put out not a tweet, but they actually put out a statement, their policy position of where they stood at that time, given the interface they had with senior health officials in the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, they spelled it out in a press release to the world on the 12th, saying that they had actually discussed this with the Chinese, that there was no single case of transmission to healthcare workers, which to them implied that there was no human-to-human transmission.
That's a lie.
Yeah.
That's a lie. In a modicum of due diligence, people in China know it. They talked about it. Dr. Li was basically the great hero of Wuhan. He was eviscerated on national TV on January 2nd, I think, by CCTV. He was eviscerated as a rumor monger for saying there was human-to-human transmission in Wuhan back in December.
And then he himself was actually infected on the 21st of January and died, I think, about 12 days later.
Why did the president highlight this yesterday?
Well, I think the pressure has been growing regarding the WHO and the fact that they've been tied up with the Chinese and the CCP in denying this. And they've essentially, Steve, as you describe it, they've been the running dogs for the CCP on this. And the fact that we're sending all of this money to the WHO. And it's not just that they were turning a blind eye to it. They were actively and willfully lying to the world about what was going on. And the ramifications now are tens of thousands dead just in America alone. We're almost up to 30,000 just in the United States.
We're losing essentially the spreads between Pearl Harbor and Antietam or 9/11 every day right now in the United States, right? And that we know this is coming down, but I mean, these are numbers that nobody ever thought on mass casualty event. Every day when you see 1,000, 1,500 people, it's like, how can you comprehend how many American citizens are dying from this? And they knew it, and they acted as it was, and they're supposed to be looked at as a intermediary that calls these things, right? They were actively supported the Chinese Communist Party in the suppression of this information.
I think the number can keep surprising us as well. You surprised me yesterday when you text with the number halfway through the day, which has been now updated on my source on the Washington Post. What was the number of deaths in the United States yesterday?
I thought it would get to almost close to 3,000. It was 2,700.
It was nearly 2,500.
2,500,
which is the highest day so far.
Yeah.
You know, and I think in amongst all of this, it can escape us just how great the death toll is every single day.
No, but that's and I think the modeling of that, we're going to get to this in the next segment about the opening. The modeling of this is, does it go on the slow curve, or now you're going to see a steep drop? And it's this concept between how much of this is concentrated in New York. But when you say concentrated in New York, it goes back to the World Health Organization, because New York is directly related to, and you know, New York Times, it didn't come from Europe. It came from China to Europe, and then Europe to JFK. Okay, it went from China, it went from Hubei and Wuhan to Europe, and then Europe got on the plane and came to. So your headline is wrong. It came from China. Okay, the intermediary was Europe, but this came from China, and it basically came. That's why I think New York now is half of the casualties so far in the United States, and obviously that's about density. It's about comorbidities. It's all those things. But in looking at how to unlock this, those are the kind of things you have to be able to grasp. But the Chinese Communist Party, remember, they've done two things that blood's all over their hands. Number one, they stopped, right, starting on the 5th, they stopped for the Lunar New Year. After they left the White House, they stopped travel throughout China. But they didn't stop travel from Hubei province in Wuhan to the United States. Okay, they knew at the time they had human-to-human transmission. They wanted to make sure they didn't have any more transmission in China than they had to have. They started locking down the Forbidden City, Shanghai, all that. They stopped. They locked down Hubei province, and they quarantined Wuhan. But they didn't stop until the president did. They didn't stop people coming from Wuhan into the United States.
You bring up a great point, because today apparently Tedros listed what he thinks are the 6 necessary steps for any member state to start reopening. And number 5, the risk of importing new cases must be managed. So here on his list of 6 steps to reopen, he's taking as number 5 the risk of travel, and yet he did nothing about travel for a long, long time.
Nothing. They condemned President Trump, right? They thought, because the concept is that you never stop travel, because first of all, they're globalists. They don't want to say the borders mean anything. But they also say, oh, people lie and won't tell you the truth, so that's why you don't want to do it.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that we're not burying the biggest story of the day here. That the Associated Press has a massive, massive expose out today with the headline, China didn't warn public of likely pandemic for 6 days. And this is from the AP's investigative team. I mean, this is so big. The Even Politico Playbook, Mike Allen's Axios newsletter, everybody picked up. GMA, I believe, had a package on it this morning. This thing is absolutely... I just want to read the 2 opening graphs and then tell you a couple things they didn't pick up.
Tell us the range of the 6 days.
So, exactly. In the 6 days after top Chinese officials secretly determined they likely were facing a pandemic from a new coronavirus, the city of Wuhan, at the epicenter of the disease, hosted a mass banquet for tens of thousands of people. Millions began traveling through Lunar New Year celebrations. President Xi Jinping warned the public on the 7th day, January 20th, I'm going to come back to that, but by that time, more than 3,000 people had been affected during almost a week of public silence, according to internal documents obtained by the AP. Let me go and walk through this. January 15th, after they knew that this was a pandemic and the proverbial you-know-what was hitting the fan, that's when they signed the Phase 1 trade deal at the White House. They knew about this. They knew about this,
100%.
And they kept it buried. And the AP doesn't go into this. And again, this isn't a knock on the AP, because they're look, and this is marvelous, marvelous work that they did here. But what they don't pick up in here is part of the reason that factored into this is they were sitting on the fact that, sitting on this information, they didn't want to blow up the trade deal. And so this is January 15th. This is the biggest buried non-lead that's not even in this story, but this is it. But it gets even worse. So January 20th, they finally start telling people internally. January 23rd is when they cut off travel from Hubei province to the rest of China, but not to the rest of the world. You could still get a flight from Wuhan to anywhere you want to go. So it wasn't until January 23rd. What was going on during January 23rd? Well, if you ask, January 22nd to the 24th was Davos.
Couldn't happen to a better group. But yes, the party at Davos had their annual celebration, right? The World Economic Forum, and they had the biggest, largest contingent ever sent in the entire history of the World Economic Forum. I think it was 350 or 400 people from the Chinese Communist Party were in Davos, and there's from the 23rd, 24th, and 25th, correct?
Yes. And so that's when, so literally they waited till they were there and started doing their meetings until they actually went and did this Hubei cutoff, because then at that point, if you're there, and it actually was, just double checked, it was the 21st to the 24th was the Davos meeting. And so they didn't announce the Hubei cutoff until early that morning of January 23rd. So at that point, President Xi and everyone else had gone in and done their meetings and gotten everything going. So it was essentially the last day or getting ready to cut out. So they literally gamed this thing out. They gamed this thing out for the phase one of the deal, and then for Davos. Here's the other thing, keep in mind, going back to, I believe this was the New York Times that wrote this up. From the time that China knew just how problematic this was until President Trump initiated the travel ban, which was then just a few days later, I believe it was at the 29th or 30th of January, some 400,000 people traveled from China to the United States. And the Chinese allowed all of that to happen, knowing exactly what was going on, the human-to-human, person-to-person, social spread. They knew all about this.
We're going to take a short commercial break. Hashtag war and pandemic. That sounds an awful lot like the Japanese when they were negotiating the peace treaty, the truce, right before Pearl Harbor. We're going to return in just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Well, I hope the sound that you're hearing is better than the one that we're hearing. We're back in the war room. We got a little choppiness right there. We're going to try to work that out with
Just
our
remix.
A remix with the ever Vish and the production crew. Welcome back to the War Room. Let's continue. 6 days that changed the world, changed your life. If you're sitting there with no money, no job, your company's in bankruptcy, you're waiting for a check of $1,200, or you're on unemployment, you couldn't have your Passover dinner, you couldn't have your Easter celebration with your church, or you can't do Ramadan, you can't do any of it, okay? Your life is destroyed. You've got no NFL football, no college football, no baseball, no Masters, all of it, okay? You see the country that's got, another $6 trillion of debt, the whole 9 yards. It's not the responsibility of the World Health Organization. Yes, they are a problem. They have to be dealt with. Management has to be changed, a new budgeting system, and countries around the world have got to start putting in more cash than American taxpayers. However, the problem is the Chinese Communist Party. We're going to have Stephen Mosher on the top of the hour to talk about these laboratories and what happened at the labs. Forget whether they're bioweapons programs or not. Were they inadvertently, the incompetence in managed poorly, like Chernobyl, the nuclear reactor in the Soviet Union? Do we have a biological Chernobyl or something slipped out? But what we do know for a fact, incontrovertible, is the fact that we have, that they suppressed the information about human-to-human transmission that they knew about as early as the third week of December and maybe earlier. Let's go back to AP.
And again, we're talking about the CCP virus here. The AP's investigative team with a story out today, explosive story. China didn't warn public of likely pandemic for 6 key days. 6 days. I want to read a couple more paragraphs. That delay from January 14th to January 20th was neither the first mistake made by Chinese officials at all levels in confronting the outbreak, nor the longest lag, as governments around the world have dragged their feet for weeks and even months in addressing the virus. I want to go to one other point here. It took the first case outside of China in Thailand on January 13th to galvanize leaders in Beijing into recognizing the possible pandemic before them. It was only then that they launched a nationwide plan to find cases. And then go a little bit further. There's something that's even a little bit more explosive here. When we say on January 20th, President Xi issued his first public comments on the virus, saying the outbreak must be taken seriously and every possible measure pursued. But here is the absolute killer. And if you're like Steve, like you said, if you're mad that you've lost your job, if you're mad that you're out of money, if you're mad that you're shelter in place, here's from the AP story. If the public had been warned a week earlier to take actions such as social distancing, mask wearing, and travel restrictions, cases could have been cut by up to 2/3, one paper later found. 2/3.
2/3. And by the way, if they had done it in the last week, if they'd done it in the time when they knew it, the last week of December, 95%. That was in a Chinese paper, right? That said 95. I think it was University of Southampton. Excuse me. The English had done the study. It was in the South China Morning Post. 95% when they knew it. So, and remember, Jack, at this time when they knew it, what were they doing about protective gear throughout the world?
Well, this is sort of the frightening thing. While they are sort of denying that this is communicable to the whole world, state-owned industries in various Western countries, from Australia to Great Britain to even the United States, were sweeping up the entire world's supply of PPEs. This became a real big issue, especially in Australia, where they ended up finding out that they had sold all of their excess supply to the Communist Chinese. This was true in several European countries as well. So this shows you the sort of evil and insidious nature of the crime that they committed. It wasn't done by accident. It was done with full will and prior knowledge. So this is a premeditated crime against humanity.
Premeditated murder. This is like sending the doctors and nurses are the troops going across the beach at Normandy. You're sending them across with no equipment, no guns, no body armor, nothing. They're going no protective gear. The reason we're supplicant right now. Let's cut to the chase here. Why are we being so nice to China? Why are we playing footsies with China? They got the PPE right now. We're afraid we're not going to get the PPE. We don't need to. These guys are criminals. Who the people most affected is the Chinese people. Lao Beijing, old 100 names. The citizens of Wuhan. This is, by the way, there's going to be a Nuremberg-type trial at some point in the future. And the CCP is going to stand trial, and the citizens of Wuhan are going to sit in for all humanity as the jury of what happened in Wuhan when they knew about it.
And Steve, this is even worse. I want to go to another paragraph in this story. This thing is so explosive. Again, it's the Associated Press. China didn't warn public of likely pandemic for 6 key days. Here we go. Doctors and nurses in Wuhan told Chinese media there were plenty of signs that the coronavirus could be transmitted between people as early as late December. Patients who had never been to the suspected source of the virus, the Hunan seafood market, were infected. Cases.
This was Dr. Lee. He was put up on national TV. Dr. Lee and his medical school buddies. Dr. Lee's an ophthalmologist. This shows you how they had to get guys, every doctor and nurse from whatever your specialty was, had to get to the emergency rooms and had to help. Dr. Lee's an ophthalmologist. He was on a WeChat with his colleagues he went to medical school with, guys down in Wuhan, and they're the first one that said, "Hey, we got a SARS outbreak here." Then the taxi driver's starting to pick it up. We've got a SARS outbreak down here. They pulled him on national TV. They eviscerated him and made him sign you're a rumor monger, which in China, if you're a rumor monger, that means your social credit score, boom, you're done. Your kids don't go to school. You're an outcast. You're a pariah. And then they had to come back. It got so bad. 2 things happened. It got so bad, and they got caught. They had the Supreme Court exonerated him, which they're not in the business of exonerating guys. They're in the business of putting guys in prisons that you never hear from again. They exonerated him. He went back and volunteered. We're going to do this on Saturday. We're going to have a special. Descent into Hell Part 2. Wuhan, the virus, and the Chinese Communist Party. What exactly happened in Wuhan? He became a hero. He went back, volunteered, and inadvertently caught the virus and died a couple weeks later. Died during this time. Dr. Lee, this great hero of the Chinese people, the citizen in the world. He's one of these emblematic of these doctors who went in there. They got caught, and it got so bad. She got so lit up that and this is where he screwed up. He admitted later that he had had his first conversation with the officials in Hubei province in Wuhan on January 3rd. Remember, he got so rattled. They came to him and said, "How was it so late? How did the Central Committee and the Politburo, why did you guys wait? And he said, well, actually, we were in communications on January 3rd. Bingo. Gotcha.
So it says here, and this is, Steve, this ties in perfectly. As a result, and this was again from the officials putting the clamp down, no new cases were reported for almost 2 weeks from January 5th. They came in, even though they knew in late December, they came in and put the smackdown. So you have 2 weeks that go by where they don't announce anything. And during that stretch, then it was January 13th, only when, this is in Thailand also. Houston, we have a problem, or Hunan, we have a problem. I guess be more accurate here. They realized the cat's out of the bag. And again, going back to what we talked about earlier, January 14th, WHO preliminary investigations conducted by the Chinese authorities have found no clear evidence of human-to-human transmission of the novel coronavirus identified in Wuhan, China, weeks after they knew with mathematical certainty that that was true.
Let me tell you, all the UN people, because we know people listen to the show, and Dr. Tedros, time to lawyer up. Because it's not just the criminal charges that eventually be brought against you. And Dr. Tedros, their criminal charges are going to be coming to you. Okay, criminal charges. Okay? You should be in prison for the rest of your life. But the financial obligation, remember, when you see that aerial shot from the drone of all the bodies on Hart Island, the old Potter's Field in New York, right, by the East River, I think it is, Jack. You see that horrific sight of burying the dead of New York City because they're so overcrowded now. They're taking them from the refrigerated morgues. They're taking them and burying them side by side in these open pits, okay, and they'll figure out the burial later. Remember, every coffin comes attached with a lawyer. Okay? Every coffin comes attached with a lawyer. So Tedros, it's not about you being head of the World Health Organization. The criminal charges are going to be coming. The whole thing's going to get sued. All these people are going to get sued. We're going to use English common law, right? I'm very proud that I run the Rule of Law Society. What's the Rule of Law Society? We're trying to get English common law. We're trying to get the rule of law into mainland China because you can see what the Chinese people do in Hong Kong, in the Free Republic of China, in Taiwan, and in the United States and Singapore. When the Chinese people have English common law and the rule of law, they prosper. When they don't and they have criminals that run them, you get Wuhan. Okay? This thing is so sick, it's disgusting. And here's what's revolting about it. I'm going to call it, is it Kristen Welker? Kristen Welker at NBC? Good reporter, does a good job. Yesterday, she's on right after they do the World Health Organization, and she says, well, the first time they did it, she didn't even talk about the 14th. You got to do your homework. NBC's spends hundreds of millions of dollars. You should know about the tweets on the 14th. You should know. Jump in here. I'll get off my soapbox. I'm so worked up about
this is Kristen.
Yeah.
Check Kristen Welker on some of the other things having to do with China and the WHO.
One of the big ones, Chuck, that the president continues to lash out at is the fact that he accuses the WHO of being slow to respond to revelations that there was this outbreak in the Wuhan region of China. So just to look at the timeline, December 31st was when the WHO became aware that there was this cluster, this outbreak in the Wuhan region of China. The very next day, they did appoint an incident management support team to look into this. They spent the next several days and weeks trying to determine how significant this outbreak was, what, if any, category it would fall into. And then it was about a month later, January 30th, that the WHO did come out and declare this a public health emergency.
Okay, NBC News, with your hundreds of millions of dollars, that happened exactly after Trump left the stage. Your hatred of Trump, sleepy-eyed Chuck Todd and NBC, is not acceptable. Okay? Not acceptable. Not acceptable. You purposely skipped over the entire month and everything they've done. Okay, note to self, Kristen Walker, that's out there, and if the War Room can have it, the production capability of NBC News should have it. On the 31st of December, there's one small item you forgot. The CDC of the Free Republic of Taiwan notified the World Health Organization that there was human-to-human transmission in Wuhan. You skipped that, okay? That's an important data point. I think it's also one of the reasons that the World Health Organization kicked everything in progress, because they knew they were going to be outed. The Taiwanese, the Free Republic, the Free Chinese in Taiwan put them on notice. They weren't going to be held, and they got the joke. Hey, if the Taiwanese told us, what did they tell the Americans? What have they already told the Americans? Right? What do the Americans know? That's where this whole thing started. And then you skip the press release on the 12th, and you skip the tweet on the 14th. How can you skip that and have this thing? This is why you play into President Trump's hands when he says fake news, says opposition party. I don't want to go to enemy of the people. But this is outright sleepy-eyed Chuck Todd, Kristen Welker, but more importantly is the NBC, because they're just talking heads. They're actors. It's the production staff and the news of NBC News that purposely gave a complete lie interpretation and air cover for the World Health Organization against the president. Am I over the top there?
No, and in fact, while you're doing that, actually, I
You're blowing her up.
I texted Kristen. I mean,
look, she's solid. I think she does a solid job.
But here's the thing: you have a production team that puts that together for you. And I mean, these are base details that anyone. I mean, look, if I were Kristen,
you're following this,
or Chuck, I'm walking in there, I'm clearing house, and being like, "Hey guys, sorry, I know we're heading into recession."
You got blown up.
Yeah,
you got blown up.
New jobs.
Find new jobs.
Go to Media Matters. Go do something else.
Sleepy-eyed and Kirsten got lit up. A huge mistake yesterday. Okay, we're going to return in just a moment.
War Room Pandemic with Stephen K. Bannon.
The epidemic is a demon, and we cannot let this demon hide.
War Room Pandemic. Here's your host, Stephen K. Bannon.
Okay, we're back live from the War Room. I'm going to now turn it to my colleagues. I'm going to calm down here for a second. I'm going to have a cup of coffee and just chill.
I might get even more fired up. I mean, just going through this AP story, I am just absolutely, I know what word I can't say because I get John Frederick's fined another $250. Maybe I'll say it anyways. I am so upset about this that they willfully hid this from the American people and from the world, not just the Chinese government, the WHO. Think we're almost up to 30,000 Americans dead because of this. Our national economy is on life support. I mean, we are in such bad shape. I mean, we don't even know if ever, we're going to return to normal, and they could have stopped all of this. I don't know how this isn't. I mean, how can you can't go back to normal in any kind of way, shape, or form. And in fact, Steve and Raheem and Jack, I think we have to take some strong declarative action here. I think right now the international community, in addition to the United States, need to step up. And the 2022 Winter Olympics are supposed to be in Beijing. I think those should be removed.
Immediately.
They have to be removed. I think the United States should be the leader on this. I think the international community should get behind them. 2022, no, we are not all going to Beijing. And again, in the winter, that sounds like the perfect time to go and catch the Wuhan virus in Beijing. Good luck on that trip. We need to pull that and move it somewhere else. There's precedent on this. It has been moved from countries back in, it was removed from right just before World War II, I believe.
Yeah.
It was supposed to be in Japan. It was moved away. Also instances of moving. They've also had a couple years in 40 and 44 when they just didn't have the Summer Olympics.
We boycotted the 1980 Olympics in Russia, right? This is, first off, if they don't move it, there's zero chance a U.S. delegation could go. We got to pull out the whole thing.
And let's remember what happened 9 years after we boycotted the 1980 Olympics.
I think they
collapsed of the Soviet Union.
Collapsed.
Yeah, and here's the thing, though. I think this needs to be. Look, of course we're not gonna go. I mean, can you imagine any of the NBA players or any of the pro? Well, obviously they wouldn't go to the Beijing. But can you imagine the pro athletes, the
hockey team,
the hockey team,
yeah,
the
no
top
way.
skiers, anywhere going to Beijing at this time? No, but we need to yank this. This shouldn't be just simply a U.S. not going, because the U.S. is going to show up and dominate in a bunch of these. Should be moved to, I think, Park City is a great location.
Yeah. You can't validate these criminals. You got it. Now we got it. They're criminals. And jump in here because I want to get on to Biden. This a Beijing Biden.
Would another infection next year be COVID-20? That was an insular heckle if you're watching Fox and Friends this morning. I wanted to ask as well, didn't the left want the 2014 Winter Olympics boycotted in Sochi?
Yes.
Because of the LGBT stuff.
Yes.
This is a little bit more pressing than that, right? Like I get the social justice
We want the
stuff,
guys. We want the people. By the way,
But
the Bernie Bros, the 15 or 20% that are going to vote for President Trump are going to support us on this. They're anti-CCP. They're pro-free labor.
It's not just that. I mean, the human rights record of China is leagues and leagues worse than even the Russian government, quite frankly. And so if you're on the left and you can't get on board with boycotting the China Olympics, you really need to take stock of your ethics.
Look, the Chinese Communist Party's at war with their own people. Look what happened to Wuhan. There are hundreds of thousands. Listen, I was on a call last night. They think there's 30 million that got sick and 1 million dead, okay? The numbers they put out and we accept in the mainstream media and NBC and CNN don't even put an asterisk. It doesn't even get the Roger Maris asterisk next to it. It just gets put up there as an official number. What, 80,000 sick and like 2,500 dead or 3,000? It's a joke. We're doing that in a day in the United States. That's what they did the entire period. No, the answer is it's a complete lie. And is it Ron Klain is supposed to be the great Ebola guy for Obama, and he's on TV all the time. He's an advisor to, wasn't he former chief of staff for Biden? How did you not know? And I'm not trying to politicize this too much. However, how did you not know? You're supposed to be such a wizard and understand this. How did you not know this, which is so self-evident, right? That even we're starting a show in the war room back then. How did you not know and let Biden come out and criticize Trump, call him a racist, a xenophobe, a nativist? That's the exact opposite. You're trying to help the Chinese people here. How did you not know? And how did Beijing Biden? Biden is totally compromised by the Chinese Communist Party. If the Democratic Party does not change him out, there's zero possibility he could be president of the United States. I don't care what the polls say, okay? The polls had Trump 8 or 10 down or 12 down in the middle of August. It doesn't matter. A guy that's compromised by the Chinese Communist Party is not going to be president of the United States when we're going to have to confront. They're at war with us, information war / cyber and economic war, full on. And this was premeditated murder, and this an actor with, hey, unrestricted warfare. I've been hammering on this book for years. They lay it all out, and they're up in your grill about it back in 1999, and the book is written in the mid-90s, okay? They lay the whole thing out. They're running the tables, and right now, we're the supplicant. We're the tributary state. That's exactly what we are. We're too afraid to kind of get them upset or get the little ambassador, that lying dog that's on TV all the time. He's a liar. He's another one. You're going to be in the trial back in Wuhan. Some official sent a guy Bannon ought to stop hammering the CCP. He ought to be talking about the United States government, the European government, how disorganized they are, dysfunctional they are, all of this. And a guy said he would like. Do you have a response? Because he was. This is an internal email that came to me through an intermediary. I said, tell him I'll see him at his trial in Wuhan. Okay, I'll see him at his trial in Wuhan because you're going to stand trial with all of them. Okay, and the people of Wuhan, the sons and daughters of the dead. Okay, that you murdered in cold blood. And you know who else is going to be there? They're going to be representatives from all the doctors and nurses in Italy. All the PPE that you sucked up in Italy, in Australia, in Europe, Australia, Brazil, and the United States, and you have it today, and you're holding it over the heads of the world like you're going to be some grand power that can kind of grant this, or the United States can't say anything because we're afraid of getting your PPP. If we can't get the PPP, that's an act of war. Okay, this is a war. He's a war. That's an act of war. I hate to be so brutally frank about it, but that's what it is.
Can only be so long before first world governments start hauling the ambassadors forward to answer for some of this behavior as well. Frankly, the Australians need to be doing it. The Swiss need to be doing it about all the PPE stuff as well. We know the Ugandans have summoned the ambassador, the Nigerians, the Ghanaians, the African Union, the Kazakhstan government, and the French government have all done that. Now it's time for some first world countries to start doing it.
The Olympics have been moved or canceled because of war before. We are in a biological war. We are in a 21st century war right now. Any halfway decent reporter right now should be asking NHL players if from all different countries if they would ever go to Beijing because of this. Go ask pink eye Bob Costas if he's going to go to Beijing to cover this. No.
Where's CNN and MSNBC all night long on this topic? You're just beating down the president because you hate him, okay? You got to put that aside. Think about the country. We're going to turn Stephen Mosher, Bully of Asia's book, next.
Well, the virus has now killed more than 100 people in China.